All right, y'all, we are back with another chapter of Never Caught, the Ona Judge story written by Erica Armstrong Dunbar. As we're going into chapter 8, it's called The Fugitive. We're learning that what pushed Ona, we've learned already what has already pushed Ona to the point that determines she's going to run away. But in this chapter, we end up getting to the point where she actually runs away and how she sneaks out. And I just want to say it's interesting some of the things that we learn and how they pertain to today. Also, how we view each other and ourselves. And also how respectability politics don't even matter. So spring of 1796 is how this chapter opens. So Ona's on her P's and Q's. She's being overly obedient. She's taking extra care and anticipating Martha's needs because she knows that they're about to sell her. She knows that no matter how well she's going to perform, no matter how good she's been to this family, they're going to give her away. Now, while she's dealing with all this, Ona is thinking about the difficulties and the downside to running away. So there's this fear of being recognized and being kidnapped and being sold back into slavery. The extreme northern cold, starvation, relentless heat in the spring and the summer, dehydration, few options for shelter and protection. Then there's this other aspect of runaways. Most of them were black men between the ages of 16 to 35. Now, black women who were enslaved in this age range typically were pregnant and having babies, but Ona didn't have any children at this point. At this time, Ben Franklin had opened up this newspaper called the Pennsylvania Gazette, and a lot of people advertised the return for runaway slaves to their masters. September in 1792, slaves that were women were advertised in the Gazette. Kate had ran away from her master at the age of 21, allegedly escaping with this man by the name of Charles, and then this other slave by the name of Nancy. She was 35 years old. Her reward was $8 and Kate's was $4. Wasn't much to get your slave back. Part of the downside of being caught as an enslaved person was being whipped and beaten in front of all of your kinfolk so that they know what would happen to them if they tried to run away. So it was a psychological form of breaking them down. George was on the lookout for news of any kind of runaway slave because this had implications on him politically. In the early 1790s, he sold 2 slaves. One he sold to the Caribbean for being difficult and defiant and was not willing to be controlled. Another was in exchange for some wine, like you literally sold a whole human being for some wine. In 1793, George ordered Ona's sister to be whipped because she was defiant and considered lazy. So she needed a good whipping to be put into shape. It was these levels and acts of defiance that kept arousing in his own household that led him to sign off on the Fugitive Slave Act of 1793. Because what else would you do when black people decide to try to win their freedom or resist oppression? You pass a law against them. See how history works its way? Now, the Fugitive Slave Act of 1793 said a slave owner could legally seize and force a slave to be apprehended and to appear in court before a judge where they'd be captured and returned. You know what the slave owner needed? Written proof or oral proof that they own that slave. Like, yeah, girl, I own you. You mine. Ta-da, the judge just gives them right to you. Now, anyone interfering with the recapture or apprehension of a slave was fined $500. They were imprisoned, or they could be sued by the slave owner for interfering with their property. Just a reminder, they were talking about a human being. Now, this is when we start to see the pushback between the North and the South and how they felt about this Fugitive Slave Act and what they really valued about their property. Pay attention to some of the language that they used and tell me what it sounds like when you hear it. Now, Northerners, although they were pro-abolition, had to adhere to federal law. Remember, there's federal, state, city, they had to adhere to the federal fugitive slave law. They argued that the Federal Fugitive Slave Act infringed upon their states' rights. So they decided to pass the personal liberties law requiring trial by jury for fugitive slaves. That meant that they had a chance to argue their case in court. Northerners also said that the recapturing of slaves was equivalent to kidnapping. I mean, it was. Southern states argued that the fugitive slave law protected their property rights and the law was backed by the Constitution. It was constitutional to own human beings and to recapture them when they ran away. With all this going on, Ona Judge knew she needed help. So she had to look in places where it was risky. That meant engaging with free black people. And y'all know how George and Washington felt about their slaves engaging with free black people. Reverend Richard Allen was a key spiritual leader during this time. He also had entrepreneurial efforts, which was not common for black people to be able to run businesses. However, he started his chimney sweep business and he was able to give black people jobs. In March of 1796, George Washington became his client. Now, there's a chance that Ona made contact with him when he came to clean the chimney at the Washington's home. There was also a chance on May 10th of 1796 where Martha was given $1.25 to go get some new shoes from Richard Allen. Now, it's important to know that Ona never revealed who helped her until later on. And these people had to be dead and gone when she revealed who helped her for their safety. Gotta love Ona. However, Ona knew that she would never be free because it was also written that she'd be given to the step granddaughters at the wedding. However, the Washingtons made it so that she would be gifted to other grandchildren if they died. So Ona was never going to see her freedom, ever. That's why Ona said, I'm about to be out this piece. Ona gave her life to the Washingtons, and they just said that she was easily discarded and able to be passed around no matter how loyal she was, no matter how obedient she was, no matter how put together she was. She was never considered fully human, and she never would be. Ona is on record saying that while the Washingtons were packing for their move to Virginia, she was packing to go, but she didn't know where. Ona also kept her plans a secret from people who lived inside of the mansion. Free white people and enslaved black people. Ona knew that some enslaved fugitives who ran away were captured because of fellow slaves that ratted them out to their masters. Remember, not everybody is for a black liberation. All skin folk ain't kinfolk. So you have to be careful with people who claim to be, oh, we're pro the people, we're pro black. Meanwhile, they plotting against you because they don't want to see you be better. Jesus, a word. So Saturday, May 21st, 1796, while the Washingtons was eating their little supper, Ona got her stuff and she slipped right out the door. And they were none the wiser. No one really knows when Martha and George realized that Ona was gone, but when they did, they knew she was not trying to come back. So May 23rd, 1796, 2 days later, Frederick Kitt, one of the stewards in the executive mansion, placed the ad in the Philadelphia Gazette acknowledging that Ona ran away and claimed she defied the president. They notified everybody across everywhere that George Bush's slave had escaped. To the point that George offered black people, free and enslaved, and white people, a $10 reward to return Ona. He was betting on black people to turn their own people in for some change. Because all skin folk ain't kinfolk. Ona went from the most trusted slave in the president's house to being a thief of her own body. That was the property of the President of the United States. June 28, Thomas Lee Jr. wrote to George that Ona had been spotted in New York and was headed to Boston. Now, this was on the word of another freed female slave. He didn't really trust her, though. He felt like they were trying to throw her off of Ona's path. So he was like, let me go ahead and notify the New York police, aka slave catchers. Slave catchers. Now, if you remember in previous chapters, Ona and the Washingtons were well known in New York, so it wouldn't make any sense for her to go there because she would be easily recognizable. Ona actually escaped by boat. In 1845, she did an interview, and she told the interviewer that she went to Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and got on a boat that was operated by Captain John Bowles. She never mentioned his name until after he died for his safety. Now, Bowles had this freight business with this guy named Thomas Lee that had ports out of New York and Philadelphia. Now, when he saw Ona, nobody knew where he stood when it came to abolition. We just knew that Ona got on his boat and she made it to New Hampshire. Now, this could have been through the connections that he had probably with free black people that allowed her to get safely on this boat. But based on the way that Ona dressed, she did not look like a typical slave. Also, Ona was traveling solo, and during that time, women who traveled solo was rare unless they were fleeing from someone or from something. He didn't really question it. He probably thought she was a free woman of color. He let her on the boat, and now Ona is officially a fugitive. I just want to say, no matter how she dressed, they still didn't see her humanity. What are your thoughts on this chapter? Let's talk about it.